Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Robert Swartwood here. Tonight, I am joined by a judge and a number one New York Times best-selling Edgar Award-winning author of 11 novels of crime fiction, as well as 10 books co-authored with James Patterson.
Yep.
He lives outside of Chicago with his wife and three children. That's right, it's your favorite writer and mine, David Ellis. David, how are you doing?
I'm great, Robert. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you for making time. Like as I
Oh,
was telling
thanks
you in the
for
green
having me.
room, I've been looking forward to talking to you. I will say, like a lot of people, and I think so. You and I, we saw each other briefly at Thriller Fest.
Yeah.
Was it a month ago now? I guess we're coming. Yeah, I guess it was last month. Um, and I remember. So I first came to your work, as I'm sure many readers probably do, through your co-authored books with Patterson.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know if really on your end, if you're even really able to kind of tell, like how that really works. But I think maybe I had listened to Invisible first, but I remember being in my local Costco, and I always kind of browse the books there. Which, fortunately, my Costco still has a little bit of a book section. I know some Costco's have gotten rid of it, which is a shame.
It is a
But
shame.
they had the Black Book with James Patterson, David Ellis, and I remember on the back. There's a Patterson basically blurbed his own book where he said, I have some favorites among the novels I've written over the years. Kiss the Girls, Invisible, which was one that you had done. First to
Yeah.
Die, and Honeymoon are at the top of my list. With each, I had a good feeling when the writing was finished. I believe this book, The Black Book, is the best work I've done in 20 years. Hope you enjoy it. To which I was like, all right, I'll be the judge of that. And it was great. It was really well
Well,
done. It was
thank
really
you.
fun. I mean, I still remember after all this time. Sometimes books you read them and then you kind of forget them. Like I on Amazon the other day, I remember seeing a book and being like, "Oh, that's right, I read that a couple of years ago. I completely forgot about it."
Yeah,
This is
me
one
too.
where I do remember now. Obviously, not everything in it, but I remember like some of the twists. I remember like just the bouncing back and forth. And of course, it made me want to
Yeah.
go and, seek out the rest of your stuff. And I remember in the green room telling you that I had seen that you hadn't really written anything solo in a while. And then, of course, Look Closer had come out a couple years ago. But to get into all of that, of course, your very first novel, I have it
Yeah.
right here.
Yep.
Line of
There it is.
Vision. This was
Yep.
published in 2001. This
Yeah.
was back before publishers really cared about the cover art, it looks like. I don't know.
Yes.
I mean, because that's
No,
really
it's a
weird.
terrible cover.
Yeah, I mean, I would actually. I mean, I'm too lazy to do it, but I do wonder if to go back and start seeing the evolution because I feel like a lot of book covers nowadays are really good. I feel like publishers really kind of spend a lot of time with art directors and cover artists or whatever to get a really good, compelling cover. But some of the covers back in the early 2000s and the 90s were just god awful.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
so Line of Vision won you the Edgar Award for Best First Novel.
Yes.
Was this your first novel, or was this just your first published novel?
Yeah, that was Robert, that was my first novel. That was the first thing I ever tried to write. And, I tell everybody I probably wrote four or five drafts of it. I mean, that book in its finished product, for example, is a first person. There's one point of view. It's a first person present tense narrative. The first time I wrote that book, it was in the third person past tense because that's what everybody else was doing. And I thought, no, this book needs more intimacy than that. I don't mean that in a sexual way, but intimacy with the character and his behavior and his psyche. And I started writing it in the first person and it came alive to me. And so, yeah, no, I had, Robert, I went to law school and before that I had a major in finance. I had no experience as a writer. The only thing I knew was what I liked to read. That was it. I mean, I wrote stories when I was a kid, but I didn't have any kind of formal training. So writing that book for 3 years, I analogized that to lifting weights. And I just wrote bad stuff and said that's not good enough, rewrite it. I kept being inspired by other authors who I would read. And, before you know it, it was getting better. And I was building my muscles. And it took me 3 years, while I was working full time at a downtown Chicago law firm. So, like an hour a night was my promise to myself. Every single day, I wrote at least 1 hour. And I wrote three or four drafts, showed it to a couple friends, but not very many because that's hard to do, right? Before you've ever written anything, to show something to people, it's putting your soul out there on the chopping block with handing someone a cleaver. But I got better. And suddenly I said, you know what, starting to feel this is reading pretty good to me. And 3 years later, I thought something that was pretty unique and special.
So you said when you were a kid, you were writing stories. I mean,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
what were you reading or what were you consuming at that time that made you? Because I mean, not a lot of, especially kids or younger people, grow up wanting to be writers. I mean, at what point did you realize that yes, you were going to go to law school, you were going to be a lawyer, and now you're a judge? But I mean, at what point did you really kind of get that bug to want to start being creative?
So the funny thing is I was a writer before I was anything else. Like when I was a kid, I would write for fun. And we also had it in school, right? Like in elementary school, you wrote creative writing and even a little bit in middle school. But by the time about seventh or eighth grade, certainly by high school, they stopped teaching it. And so you had to take it upon yourself to do it. And that's when I stopped because I was so busy between trying to get good grades and be good at the sports I played, football and baseball, and chasing girls around. Those were the only three things I cared about in high school. And so if you didn't give it to me as an assignment, I wouldn't do it. And that's when I stopped. So, but before that, in grade school, I would write plays for extra credit and ask the teacher to let me put it on with my friends. I would enter story contests and I would supposedly win them, but I say supposedly because I think everyone who entered won. I didn't realize it at the time. I'm like, hey, I'm a winner. There are a lot of other winners for some reason. I think everybody won, but it didn't matter. It was the joy of doing it. And to answer your question, the stuff I read was the Hardy Boys. I read
Yeah.
mysteries. I read Encyclopedia Brown, and I read The Great Brain, Who Solved Mysteries, and I read the Hardy Boys. And so I've always been drawn to that. I mean, the genre has always been the thing I cared about.
Were you writing I mean, in college? I mean, before then I mean, because
Oh,
it takes a lot to sit down and want to write a novel. So before that, were you trying to write any type of short stories? And to piggyback on that, have you written any short stories? As far as I mean, have you published any short stories since like your first novel?
I've written one short story for an anthology. I can't even remember the name of it. Um, and it was for an anthology that Joe Conrath put
Joe
together. Had some
Conrad.
pretty good
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah. I think I
had
remember
some
that.
pretty good
That was a long
authors
time
in it.
ago.
Yeah, yeah, that was a long time ago. This is going back to early 2000s probably. And it was a fun little story. I mean, I liked it. Same kind of genre, surprise twist. But no, I mean, the answer to your earlier question is, high school, college, majoring in finance, law school, I didn't do any writing. It was actually what my one of the biggest moments of my life, to be honest, was probably 2 or 3 years into being an attorney. I went on vacation like you do, and I went to someplace warm like you do, right? I was standing on a beach in like, I don't know, someplace in Florida, watching the sunset with a drink in my hand and thinking about my life, because that's when you do things like that. You get a little reflective. And I thought, what happened to writing? It was something you loved so much. Why did you stop doing it? And I didn't have a good answer, except I had always assumed I would be a lawyer because my mind works that way. And I just never lost the focus of being a lawyer. I always thought I was going to be a lawyer, and I was. So I said, you know what? Now you're a lawyer. Make the time and make the commitment and write a book. Don't just talk about it. Don't just fantasize about it. Don't just write a couple chapters and give up. Write the whole damn book. And that was the pledge I made to myself that day on the beach, or that evening on the beach, was I was going to try to do it. If I got turned down, at least I could say I tried. And I got turned down by a ton of people for that book that won the Edgar. I got turned down by 75 agents before somebody said, I'll take a chance on you. It took me 18 months to find a literary agent. And then it took me 18 days to find a publisher because once this agent discovered me, he said, I want you to go to what was then called Penguin Putnam. Now it's Penguin Random House. And he said, I think they'll like this. And they snapped it up. So that was a whirlwind when that happened. But no, it was 3 years of just telling myself, believing that I had a chance and making myself do it. And obviously, Robert, you couldn't do that if you didn't enjoy it. Like it was fun for me, you know? It was a side of my brain I'd never exercised. So here I am during the day, toiling as a lawyer, doing all the sometimes mundane things you do, billing all those hours for a private law firm. And at night I got to go play. So I looked forward to that hour or that 2 hours in front of that tiny little Apple computer. I mean, the screen was probably smaller than my face, right? Those little computers. And but to me, it was the only thing I'd ever known. And I would just play. And if I didn't love it, I wouldn't have finished it. You have to want to do it. But that's frankly the thing I'm proudest of. The awards are nice, the success is nice. But what I'm proudest of is when I had all the odds against me, I didn't quit. I kept working to make my book better and better until I got published. So, yeah, it was just learning on the job, trial and error, writing bad stuff and getting slowly better until I kind of got the hang of it and taught myself.
At that time, were you even aware of the Edgar Awards, like the
No.
the Mystery Writers Award? Yeah, I mean, yeah, okay, because that seems to be sometimes what happens. Because I feel like, especially nowadays, a lot of writers coming up are very aware of all these different
Yeah,
organizations, of all the awards, and they're constantly, striving to win awards. And yes, awards are nice, but like, spoiler alert, they don't really mean any. I mean, it doesn't guarantee you another book
right,
deal. It doesn't guarantee sales. I mean. I
right.
have this story that I don't think I ever really said publicly, but what the hell? A friend of mine, he knows somebody who had won the Pulitzer. And, months or a year later, or whatever it was, as writers do, they talk, shop. And it was basically like, what has your publisher done for you now that you won the Pulitzer? And the writer pointed over at the book and said, you see that sticker on the cover, the one that says winner of the Pulitzer Prize? They did that. And so
Yeah,
they just kind of like, just kind of reinforces the fact that really sometimes even when the Pulitzer doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be a lot in there. But what I wanted to ask in terms
that's right.
of, you said you went through a lot of different drafts. It's very fascinating. Having read the book recently, it is written in first person present tense, like you said. And in the green room, we were discussing that nowadays, especially in this type of space, in the thriller space, crime space, psychological suspense thriller space, first person present tense is like is just ubiquitous. I mean, almost every book is going to be written in that first person present tense. But a
Yeah.
lot of books, and I don't even really know when that transition started happening. Um, but back then, back in the early, in the 90s and in 2001 when this was published, and obviously you were writing it, a couple years prior. Um, First person present tense was not something that you saw typically. In
No,
the
no.
in the acknowledgments, you do acknowledge Scott Turow, and I know like
Right.
Presumed Innocent was written in first person present tense. And in the back
Yep.
of my head, I'm thinking like, was that kind of an
Yep.
inspiration? Because why you decided to switch it from third person past tense?
Scott was a huge inspiration to me. I worked on a case as a lawyer with Scott when I was writing my first book and when I finished it.
Wow.
And I had talked to him several times as a lawyer to lawyer, but I'd never talked to him as aspiring writer to aspiring writer. And I called him and left him a message, kind of shakily saying, with my voice shaking a little bit, call me when you get a chance. And then he called me back, and I was beating around the bush, and he's like, Dave, is there something you wanted to talk about? Because I don't think we have anything in the law to talk about. I think he could tell where I was going, and so I told him what was happening, and he gave me some great advice, and he was really supportive. And but yes, Presumed Innocent was a huge influence on me. It's one of the greatest books I've ever read. I still to this day think that Scott Turow is the best author alive. He is so good, and I know since he writes in a space that is, I know he would not call it, legal thrillers. He doesn't like that term. He writes kind of drama. It's drama. He calls them legal dramas sometimes. Whatever you want to call it, he's in this sort of space, and we tend to not be considered the best writers, right? He doesn't write, what you would typically deem as literary fiction, although his books are very literary. The most recent book he wrote, excuse me, it's called Presumed Guilty. It's a sequel. It's a trequel or whatever a third book actually about that character. Um, is a modern day To Kill a Mockingbird. It's brilliant. But it's also a fun legal thriller. Like he combines those two things. I don't think I'll ever be as good of a writer as him. I don't try to be like anybody else. If I did, I would live a very frustrated life. But I think of Scott as the guy who's playing chess while the rest of us are playing checkers. I mean, he really is brilliant. And he's been a good friend and mentor to me over the years. I'm going to see him in a week. Um, I hosted a book launch for him in Wisconsin. I was thrilled to do it. Yeah, he was a huge influence. And but you're right, he was one of the first people doing this. You didn't see first person back then. And you certainly didn't see a protagonist who may or may not be reliable. And I don't know how that came to me, but I have always been drawn to people who are just a tiny bit off psychologically. By that, Robert, I don't mean people who are, sociopathic, and I don't mean people who are mentally ill to this extent that they're schizophrenic or they're hearing voices. But I think all of us, I'm probably going on here, so cut me off if I'm going off on a
No,
rant.
no,
But
keep going.
what I always am interested in writing about since the day I started, and I always will be, I don't believe in the concept of normal. I don't think any of us are normal. I don't know what normal means, but I'm interested in people who are conventional in the sense that they do the basic things in life that most of us do. They go to work every day, they go to church, they pay their taxes, they raise their kids, they follow all the basic rules of society, and yet they go off a little bit. They push those boundaries. They do the biggest thing that you're not allowed to do, which is to kill. And obviously, a lot of people do that. I'm interested in the conventional person who is pushed for whatever reason, within or without them, to kill. And
Yeah.
I think that that is something that people really relate to. I think that's why people like true crime, right? I mean, you watch true crime and you see someone say, "Well, this person was lived next door to me for 20 years. He seemed like such a nice person. We used to carpool for soccer. He would his son would babysit my children. Who knew that one day he would take an axe to his entire family?" Well, a seemingly normal person went off. Why? We find that interesting because that's not completely different from ourselves. And that's the kind of stuff I like. You're never going to see me writing a book about someone who dons a cape and can fly through the air, or who bullets bounce off them, or who's a superhero. That does not interest me. Science fiction does not interest me. Real people who are slightly messed up, who do very messed up things, that's what moves me. It always has been.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I don't want to spend all this time talking about line of vision, but I do want to just so so you said you spent like, a couple years working on different drafts or whatever else.
Yeah.
Are you, and I always hate the term, but are you a pantser plotter, kind of both? I mean, like when you started writing this book, did you know the twist? Did you know how it was going to end, or was it one of those things you just had like kind of a basic idea and you just kind of went from there and the story started and the characters just evolved
Yeah.
as you were going?
Yeah. I would love to be somebody who can outline every chapter of a book ahead of time. I'm not. I never will be. I have to get inside the story and I gotta live with the characters and watch them move and breathe and act to come up with a lot of the twists. I try to start with a few basic ideas for a twist. In that book, I changed my mind about 3 or 4 times. Traditionally, in a book that I write, I will have some basic idea. I might have the big twist at the end in mind. I might not. Um, but then I just start writing it and things happen. And sometimes, Robert, that can be really inefficient, right? Because I could be on page 186 and say, wait a second, I have to change something major because it'll be really cool. It's worth it. But that means I have to go back to page one through 185 and make all kinds of changes and lose 6 weeks of work. Well, not 6 weeks of work, but 6 weeks of time. And so I don't tend to get my books out fast because I keep changing my mind as I go. But that's when the best twists come alive to me. I don't know how someone could plot an entire book that's twisty. You could plot an entire book that's not twisty, but I don't know. I don't have that gene.
Yeah.
Patterson's good at that. Patterson likes to outline everything in advance. He and I are complete opposites in that regard, and that tension between us has been very good for us because I will
Yeah.
sometimes come up with ideas in the middle of a book. You said Invisible. Invisible is a great example. I came up with a completely different idea for Invisible midway through the book. And he was skeptical, but he didn't care whose idea it was. Like Jim Patterson doesn't care about that. He just cares, is it cool? Is it interesting? So he gave me some rope to do it and ended up loving it. And so we changed the outline because I came up with this cool idea. That doesn't happen every time for sure, because he's really good at plotting, but and he's a big plotter. He's a big advocate of outlines. And I just tell him, Jim, I can't do it. I just can't write that way. I wish I could. It'd be
That
faster.
that is fascinating. And again, at Thriller Fest this past year, James Patterson was there. He won. Grandmaster. I forget what he was awarded, but
Yeah.
there was a, discussion between him and Greg Hurwitz, and that was something that Patterson talked about, where he talked about, when it comes to the co-authoring, I think like the best idea wins. Like it doesn't matter. He doesn't want to, it's not all about him. He's like, if one of his co-authors has a better idea or whatever else, then yeah, that works. And it's fascinating for somebody. I mean, because yes, he will plot out the books, he outlines it. And my understanding is, having talked to other writers who have worked with Patterson, typically you're following his pattern. I mean, this is essentially his novel that you're helping write. Um, but somebody who is not a big outliner, like, I mean, what was that first experience? Like, can you talk about just like a little bit? I mean, we don't have to go into it too much, but just kind of like, doing that very first book, because I imagine that was probably a little bit difficult, having somebody who likes to just sit down and kind of, see where the characters and story takes you, as opposed to then sitting down and basically being like, okay, this is where he expects you to go.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it helps that we go little by little. Like, I'll work on maybe the first five chapters and send it to him, and then we'll talk. And the analogy I always use is between a director watching an actor act out a scene. If the director likes what the actor did in the scene, he'll say, okay, great, let's go with it, move on to the next scene. If he doesn't like it, he'll give you some feedback. He'll say, okay, that was great, but I need a little more drama. I need a little more tension. I'm not feeling this character, whatever it may be. And then he'll say, do it again. And so Jim will usually give the co-author like me the chance to rewrite it if it's not the way he wants it. Having said that, he knows that sometimes I will give him pages that were not outlined and that I'm doing something different, and we'll talk about that. And that's my way of proposing it to him is I'll do the chapters, but I'll have something different, and he'll say, okay, what are you doing here? What are you thinking? And I'll say, well, what if we did this? How does this feel? And often he'll be like, I think this could be cool. Let's at least give it a shot. If it doesn't work, we'll go back to the original outline, but let's give it a shot. He likes to play like that a little bit. And he knows that the book is going to be better if the co-author feels like he's not just writing down exactly what he was told, but he is bringing some of his own creativity to it. He's very big on that collaboration. I don't think in all the years we've worked together, which is about 18 years now, I don't think he's ever made me feel like he was the boss and I was the employee, even though that is probably the truth. And he always has the last word. We both implicitly know that, but he doesn't act that way. He's like, what are you thinking? What about this? And then he might say, well, what about this? This would be cool. We'll play with it. So I can't speak for other co-authors. I can only speak for myself. But usually the finished product does not look exactly like the outline.
Hmm.
But it's always slowly and methodically. It's not like I write the whole book and show it to him and say, oh, surprise, I did something different. It goes slowly and he keeps watch. And he's so smart. He's so good about focusing on the audience. And, this is never about the author. It's never about the whose idea or did you really like this passage as the author. It's will the reader like this passage? He'll sometimes say things to me. I'll write about the law sometimes, and I'm kind of a law geek, right? I mean, that's my other life. And so we'll often write about the law in my books with him. And he'll say, Dave, you're going on a little too much about the law. I know it's interesting to you, but it's too much for the reader. How about one paragraph, not four? And I'll say, okay, makes sense. And every time he tells me to change it, I realize afterwards it's for the better. Because he never stops thinking about what did I promise the reader? I promised the reader a fast, fun piece of escapism. That's what we do, right? He'll be the
Yeah.
first to say, I'm not writing a book that's going to win the Pulitzer. I'm not pretending to. I'm not curing cancer either. I'm writing something fun for you to read so you can get away from all the crap going on in the world. And that's his promise, and he always makes sure he's going to keep that.
So going back to the,
It's really learned
yeah.
so much from him. I've just learned so much from him. That's all I was going to say.
Yeah, well, absolutely. So going back to the Black Book, again,
Yeah,
he still considers that one of the best books that he's done.
yeah.
Have you had conversation? I mean, like, do you know why he considers that, to have been such an accomplishment? Because it is a great book, but I mean, is there like, but I mean, again, he's written a lot of, I mean, there's been a lot of
Yeah,
books. I mean,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
and it has to be really, a great feeling for yourself to feel like, one of the many books that he's published, he feels is one of the best, was one of the ones that you had co-authored. I mean, I don't know, like, was there something during that maybe writing process, or I mean, I don't know, like something that sticks out to you, and if not, that's fine. But I'm just curious.
Well, that's the funny thing, I think it's more of a credit to Jim than it is to me because I think with that book, which was probably about the fifth, I think it was the fifth book we'd done together. I'm pretty sure it was. Um, I had started to go off the reservation a little more than usual. And he said one thing to me once, and he said, trust the outline, Dave. Trust it. I'm not just putting these scenes in here, you know, to get it over with. Like I think about all these scenes and I knew that, but he said, trust me and just try to stay more within what I have planned. And I wouldn't say the Black Book was 100% of the outline, but it was much more hewed to the outline um, than the previous books we'd done. And I had learned that lesson. And so what I always tell Jim is if you think that book is great, it's probably because your outline was great. Because I probably stuck closer to the outline in that book than most books.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know what's really interesting about how he thinks of things? He hardly ever uses the word chapter. He talks about scenes. And one thing he got, yeah, and one thing he got me to do, which took me a while to even understand what he meant. He always says, I just write really good scenes. So that's really it. Write really good scenes. If every scene is great, they're going to like the book. And yeah, do you want twists? Of course, that's part of writing a great scene sometimes. But he said, write great scenes and people will like it. And I thought of cinematic. Okay. And I thought, what are the movies that I like the most? What are the movies you like the most, Robert? And you don't have to answer that. It's more rhetorical, but, and I don't mean the books that or movies that necessarily won the Oscars, but a movie that you love so much that you will start watching it midstream on cable or something, and every single scene is enjoyable. I've got a few like that. I'll probably date myself if I tell you what they are. There are a lot of them are like gangster movies, but Good Will Hunting. Okay, there's an example. That's not a gangster movie, right? Like every scene in Good Will Hunting really has a payoff. It's really enjoyable. And Jim would say if you loved every scene, then by definition you love the movie. And he's right. It had a great ending. It had a satisfying ending, but I loved every scene. If you're enjoying it all the way through, it's a good book. And that
Yeah.
sounds so elementary, doesn't it? Like it sounds like the simplest thing I could say, but people get so caught up in the plots sometimes, and they get so caught up in all the little nuggets of thrillers and mysteries, and I got to misdirect, is they sometimes forget to write fun chapters. And that it may be the single biggest thing he taught me. And when I went back to writing my own books first, which was Look Closer, after I took a break from my solo novels, I wrote the word fun on a post-it and stuck it up in the corner of my computer. And I said, every chapter is going to be fun for the reader in some way, right? It could be scary, it could be thrilling, it could be hilarious, it could be romantic, it could be heartbreaking, but something big and entertaining in every chapter.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you mentioned the scenes because I was just going to say that at Thriller Fest when he was talking to Hurwitz, Greg had asked him, what do you look for in a co-author? And he had said, somebody who writes good scenes. Because and it's interesting because yes, I mean, on a basic level, a chapter typically is a scene. But thinking of it also of and again, I mean that also kind of goes back to at least the way I always kind of view just the writing process and when I talk to other writers about it, it's always like if you can take out this chapter and the book still works, then why is it there? And the same thing with the scenes, like and that's some like when you're doing the self-editing and whatever else. But not only that though, and I feel this is probably something at least having read Line of Vision and then starting directly in Look Closer, so having skipped about 20 years of your writing,
Yeah,
um, I think obviously Look Closer is just much tighter. I mean, I think, Line of Vision obviously was, I mean, you're doing a lot of different stuff, but, on at least Kobo, I think lists the about 140,000 words, which is very, very long. Whereas
yeah,
opposed to, Look Closer is not as long. I think it's over 100,000 words.
yeah,
Probably still, it's like 400 pages because you have a lot shorter chapters, which I want to get into. But I feel like,
yeah,
it's one of those things too. Like I always credit like Law and Order. where Law and Order starts you right in the middle of the scene. You know, um, the detectives find something on a dead body. We don't see them in the car driving to whoever's
Right.
place. We don't see them knocking on the door, introducing themselves. They're in the apartment already. The person is already answering a question that we did not hear, but we know what the question is. So it like
Yeah.
and I feel like you do that a lot more in like Look Closer, where it's like, we're just in the scene. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so can you talk a little bit about and I think maybe it was on the Thriller Zone a while back where you talked a little bit about, I don't know if this was a Patterson thing, but basically with the short chapters, which again, I feel like he gets shit for it, which I think is unfair about, oh, he has a lot of these short chapters. But I mean,
Yeah.
All the Colors in the Dark by Chris Whitaker, which just came out, like last year. I just recently read that. It's an amazing book. It's like a 600-page book, has like over 200 chapters. It benefits from the short chapters, because
Yeah.
I feel like the psychological thing where, a lot of people, when they open a book, they'll see like, okay, I don't really have that much time to read. How long is this chapter? This chapter is 50 pages. I don't have time for that.
Right.
But if they sat down and they're like,
Right.
oh, three pages, 4 pages, okay. What's the next chapter? 2 pages, okay. And then before they know it, they've read 70 pages when they didn't think they could read, 50 pages. So like, but anyway, I
That's
think it was
right.
like 130,000 words that you guys try to keep, chapters around that. Does that sound right, or is that just in my head? I just somehow came up with that.
The number of words per chapter.
Like
So
ideally, try to keep the
yeah.
chapters no
Well,
more
it's
than
more
like
than
1,300
it's more
words
than ideal. Yeah. So for Jim, he's got a rule. It's 1,200 words a chapter.
or 1,200 words. Okay.
1,200 words is his max. And there have been two books that I worked on with him where he made an exception for that. Although he said that doesn't mean I want you to go a lot over it. And I really like short chapters, and many of the reasons you already said. For one thing, it makes you read the book faster, and I think you enjoy the book more the less times you put it down. It also keeps a very good pace for the reader, and Look Closer is not the shortest book ever written. It's got some length compared to some books, but everybody who read it has said to me, but it read fast because of those quick chapters. The pace was really tight. And the genius of Patterson is that by forcing his co-authors to put a scene into 1,200 words or less, which is maybe 3.5 pages, he makes you pack a punch. You're not allowed to waste time. You can't waste time. You have to start in the middle of the scene because if you start, at the like you said at the beginning of the scene where you eat breakfast in the morning, get in your car, drive someplace, and knock on the door, all that gets cut because you don't have time for it in 1,200 words. You just got to knock on the door and have someone open it in action, like Law and Order. It's that's a huge benefit to those short chapters is it makes you pack a punch. So like when I wrote Look Closer, I paid very close attention to the length of the chapters, and very few of them were very much over 1,200 words. I didn't hold tight to it, but probably 15, 1,600. If it was more than a 4-page chapter, I'd be thinking I better cut something or break the chapter into two because it matters to the reader. And again, if you're doing what Patterson would tell you, which is think about the reader, I think the readers like that. I have talked to so many people about Look Closer. I've done over 100 book clubs virtually, which I offer to anybody. If you want to do a book club with me, go to my website and sign up. I'll do it with you. Not one person has ever said, I wish the chapters were longer. But most of them have pointed out, I loved that you wrote short chapters. It's what people want these days.
Yeah.
So you should be trying to give the readers what they want
Oh yeah.
to support them.
I think it was 2 years ago. I was at a thing in Asheville doing kind of this event, and we had who I was speaking with. We were talking about the idea of short chapters, the same thing. And after the event, someone had come up to me and basically was like, "So what's the ideal chapter length?" And I was like, "I don't have a good answer for you. Like every chapter should be as long as it needs to be.
Yeah.
However, if you have a chapter that's like 3,000, 4,000 words long." Is there a way that you can maybe like cut that in half in a way? Like, is there like a point where like, kind of like, and I think you actually did that and Look Closer, where it's like we're in a scene, but we have like a little bit of a scene break where it's like,
Yeah.
someone says something and it kind of ends on that punch and then a
Yeah.
scene break and then we have kind of like the person reacting to it.
Yeah.
I remember, I think Liz Moore had done that in Bright Shiny River, or the title escapes me right now. But it was one of those things where it's like, and then so like within that chapter, we're having little like mini scenes, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, and I love those. You know who does that really well is Megan Abbott.
Yeah.
She's one of my favorite writers. I put her on a pedestal, and she's got a book out that I haven't read. I think I'm two books behind now, which really makes me sad. I have to get on that, but she likes to do that. Um, it allows you to give little insights and little snippets or little moments without making it having to make a whole scene out of it, and that can be very enjoyable for the reader. Think cinematically. You do the same thing cinematically sometimes. You don't do it every chapter, but if it works, it can be very effective, and I think it works more often than it doesn't, actually. I think
Yeah.
it's a very good way to write.
Yeah. And just real quick, it's Long Bright River is the Liz Moore book. I just wanted to make sure to
Okay.
correct the record on that. So
Yeah.
I want to move on from Patterson, which by the way, this is the most recent Patterson novel. No one's read it yet. Lies, he told me. And then, well, actually, I want to talk a little bit about when you're approaching a book like this. So I haven't actually, I think, read Lies You Told Me yet, but just paging through it, it looks like there is, a first person present tense chapters, and then there's chapters from other characters' points of view. Is
Yeah.
that a conversation, or does he usually leave that up to kind of you as the author on basically how to tell this story? If it's going to be told in first person, if it's going to be told in third, or past tense third, present tense. I mean, like what type of I guess back and forth kind of goes into that.
Not too much. He likes to write with the protagonist in the first person present tense. He likes that, and he always says you're gonna have a protagonist. He or she is in the first person, and Liza told me it's a she, and then the subsidiary characters can be in the third person,
Yeah.
and that works for him. He likes that. I do all kinds of things. That's one of the major decisions, right, Robert? I mean, you're an author. I mean, that's a major decision you have to make in a book. It's one of the first things you decide. If first person, third person, multiple points of view. Jim likes more than one point of view, but he likes one clear protagonist in the first person. And I happen to generally agree with that too.
Actually, jumping to look closer.
Yeah.
I You do something with this, which again I think is a more recent trend. I've noticed like Robert Crace doing it. I think even Connolly's done it recently, where before it would be, chapter one, and then it would be in someone's point of view or whatever else. Chapter two, someone else's point of view. Now you're like labeling the chapters. So we
Yeah.
have, Vicky, we have, so is that something, like where did that decision come from? Or is that more just because of like recent trends, or was that suggested, or like how'd that come about? Because you also do it I have so many of your books here. You also do it in the most recent novel too.
Yeah.
Which, as far as I can tell, I don't think you've done that in any of the prior, at least solo novels that you've done.
No, I mean, in some of the solo novels I did in the past, I just had one point of view, and it was the first person, and it was present tense. I
Right.
did one in the third person. Um, the reason I did it and look closer is because I have three points of view that are all in the first person. And so that was a very conscious decision I made, and I think it worked, but you run a risk when you do that because, as I'm sure you know, Robert, the one thing you don't ever want to do to the reader is confuse them, lose them. And I would never want a reader to say, "Who's talking right now? Who is this?" And if I had three main characters all in the first person and I didn't tell you who they are, it might take you a few lines to know which one is doing the talking. And that's no good. I don't
Yeah.
want that. I don't ever want that. So if nothing else, it's a pure orientation for the reader. Because if the reader goes, "Huh? What's going on? I don't understand what's happening." That's a fail by me.
Well, no, I mean, and I guess in a novel where all the narrators are first person, it definitely makes sense. I know at least with the
Yeah,
Robert Crace novels, it's just like, Elvis Cole might be in first person, and then you have Joe
right,
Pike and whatever else in third person, but he'll still
right.
label those chapters. So I guess, and it is nice, I guess, from a reader standpoint, because like you're going into it, you immediately then know whose head you're going to be in. You immediately know who this character basically is going to be, this chapter's focusing on, as opposed to depending on how it's written, it might take you a couple paragraphs to kind of figure out like, oh, okay, we're in, so and so's point of view. So I want to get off Patterson because we could talk about that all day, but real quick. So you were name checked in the acknowledgments for the first book he did with Clinton.
Yeah.
The President is Missing, where they say one of the thanks as well to David Ellis, always patient, always wise, who stuck with us through the research, our first and second outlines, and many, many drafts. This would not be the story it is without David's help and inspiration. Can you talk a little bit just about obviously you've done your co-author stuff, but I guess you've also helped out with other Patterson projects. And you don't really have to go, I guess, into, too great detail, but I mean, it's pretty incredible having worked on a book with a prior president.
Yeah.
I mean, it was
Yeah.
such a huge book, especially when it came out.
Yeah, it was yeah, no, that was the biggest book of the year in 2018 in the world. And it was crazy. He called me one day and he said, "Are you a Democrat or a Republican?" And I said, "Well, I as a judge, I don't really think of myself in that political sense. Why do you ask?" And he said, "Do you want to write a book with Bill Clinton?" And he said, "But I got to tell you something at the front end, Dave, and I feel bad about this, but your name can't go on the cover. We can't have three names. We can't have
Mm,
Clinton and Patterson and Ellis." He said, "I just can't do that." And I said, "Okay, that's okay. Sure." He said, "Is that okay?" And I said, "Can I meet him?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Okay, then I'll do it." So I got to fly out to New York where they live, north of the city, and of course Chappaqua, I guess is the name
yeah.
of it, Chappaqua, and got frisked by Secret Service, and I got to spend an afternoon with Bill Clinton talking about the book, but also just listening to him talk about everything, and he's, such a fascinating character in our nation's history, recent history, and so intelligent and knows so many things, and so I learned a lot about the book from just hearing him talk about being president, not even necessarily referencing the book. But, once it came time to write the book, it wasn't materially different than what I would normally do with Jim, which is Jim would outline the book and I would write a few chapters at a time and show it to him. The problem is after I showed it to him, then we'd show it to the president. And President Clinton would weigh in on his points. And there would be a few points in the book where I would say, "I don't know what to write here. This needs to be Clinton." I would write WJC, for William Jefferson Clinton, and I'd say, "I don't know how to say this." Not very often, but sometimes. And he, of course, could always come in and say, "No, that's not quite how it works. Let me edit it." And fine, edit it. So it was just a Patterson Plus experience where there were three of us working together on it. And there are some passages that he wrote, that President Clinton just wrote. Um, but it was very much, Patterson. I don't know how he does it with these other people he brings in. He wrote one with Dolly Parton. I don't know how he did that, but he can thread that needle, man. I mean, he can figure out how to write an engaging story just by coming up with the idea for the story and the scenes. And the rest of it gets done one way or the other with his oversight at all times. He's amazing that way. He continues to do it at a very high level. And that experience was one I'll never forget. It was terrific.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about the series. So you've mostly done standalones, but you've done four
Yeah.
books, and I'm probably going to butcher this name, but is it the Jason Coleridge series? Coleridge
Yeah.
series?
Coleridge. Yeah, you got it
So,
right.
so when you wrote that first book, the Hidden Man,
Yeah. The Hidden
was
Man.
that just meant to be a standalone that turned into a series, or did you initially think like, okay, I'm going to write this could be a series. This is going to be book one.
Right, right. I had always been known to my publisher as somebody who would never write a series. And they would say, "That's not what Dave does." And the reason is I like to tear my characters to the ground by the end of a book. And I like to reveal a lot about them, a lot of their secrets from their past and from their psyche. And when you do all that in a book, it's kind of hard to do a sequel. And a couple of things happened with the Jason book when I wrote The Hidden Man. First of all, it got nominated for the LA Times Book Prize for fiction. So my publisher was very excited about that. That's the first time I met Megan Abbott, by the way, because she was also nominated.
Oh, nice.
And but the other thing was I realized that with Jason, he had already been burned to the ground before the book began with what had happened to him in his past, and so he was rebuilding. And I thought I could do it with him, and I enjoyed it. And we did 4 books, and they did well. And I thought I was done at that point. I a series, at least a long-term series, doesn't seem like something I'm going to do. I want to bring something fresh every time, and that's hard to do when you have a character who's you've already said things about and you have to stick to it as the books go on. You know, you get a guy like Lee Child who was very brilliant in coming up with Jack Reacher. And, in that situation, Reacher has a little bit of a past, but it's mostly just going place to place that is completely different because he gave him this nomadic existence. That was brilliant. That was brilliant of Lee to do. And he didn't do it by accident. He's a brilliant guy. I got to know him pretty well for a while because we had the same publisher and the same editor. And he's another brilliant guy. And so you can do it if you write like a Jack Reacher character, but the kind of people that I'm going to write about, they're not going to lend themselves for the most part to a sequel. It's just not what I do.
Yeah. Well, I think someone had said that usually when you're telling a story, it's about the characters, what was it? Either the worst or best part or like day of their life or something along those lines. And so
Yeah.
usually that's why, a standalone is always just like focusing on that character through whatever they're going through. But yeah, when you do a series, it's one of those things too where, I mean, there's so many books out there, so many different series. Sometimes it's hard to for just, readers might not stay with it. You might have a lot of, book one and two, but then just reader fall off.
Yeah.
I just realized I actually have the last alibi here, which was the last.
Yeah.
So to be clear, you're saying that we're never going to see another Jason book, or just as of right now, you're thinking like probably not.
As of right now, I'm thinking not.
Now, I did misspeak because I was looking through it. You do that chapter header thing in this
Yeah.
book,
Yeah.
but you did not do it in The Wrong Man. So I guess was this the first one you ended up doing that in? I'm
I
like quizzing you on like all your books there. We're gonna go through all of them.
Well, I think, but no, but it's a fine question and it's a smart question, Robert. And the answer is I think the wrong man just had one point of view, so it wasn't necessary.
Yeah.
But the last alibi had more. The last alibi had Jason and Shauna, his law partner and erstwhile, girlfriend. So I needed to, so I made the decision to have 2 points of view. I made the decision that I couldn't tell the entire story without Shauna also being a part of the narrative. And so then yes, I'm going to give them their own chapter headings.
So when did Hidden Man come out? Do you remember the year or like thereabouts?
Yeah, it was
I guess my
probably
question is, was that you had you done Invisible? Like, I mean, had you already done any series books with Patterson to kind of like, because I mean, again, writing a standalone is hard enough, but then when you're trying to write what could be a series, that feels like, there's always that self-doubt or that fear of like, oh, am I going to be able to sustain like, another two or three or four or however many books?
right.
Um, or was it comfortable, with the idea like, okay, I mean, because like, when you're writing on book two, yeah, I mean, like with every book, I always feel like it's not easy to jump into a new book, but at the same time, like you have these characters that you've already established, you have this world, you don't have to do like, you like don't have to do like more world building or whatever else.
Right.
Like you have these characters that, have become familiar. And so oftentimes you can just kind of like jump right in where you left off.
No, I mean, all these things go into every decision and the big decision of what you're going to write next. And I had not written Patterson when I wrote The Hidden Man. I had not worked with him yet, so it was probably like 2006 or 7. And I probably wrote it a year before that. I didn't start with Patterson until 2009. So no, it wasn't Patterson. It was I just go with my gut, probably to a fault, but I always ask myself, what do I want to write? And my theory is if I don't want to write it, it's not going to be as good. But if I want to write it, if it's something that really makes my heart go pitter pat, it really moves me, if it's what I would want to read, then that enthusiasm is going to show up on the page. And I wouldn't say that I lost my enthusiasm for Jason after The Last Alibi. I would say I had some resolution that I felt needed to be there, and I felt like the story could end there. And my publisher was okay with that. If they had begged me to write another one, then I would have said, okay, then let's talk about that. But that's getting to write by the time that last book was written, I was starting to get into the point where my publisher and I started having conflict over what I was going to write. And I wanted to move more into the stuff that I write now, which is psychological thrillers. And they said more, well, you're a lawyer, and then I became a judge and I worked with politicians and they said you could write political stuff. And I said, I could, but I don't particularly want to. And
Yeah.
so I tried to meet them halfway and I realized I wasn't writing what I really wanted to write. Um, People always say write what you know, like that's the big thing. And that's true. You should probably write what you know pretty well. But what my number one rule is write what makes you passionate. Because if you don't, that's going to show up in the writing. But if you are passionate about it, that's going to show up in the writing. And I never want someone to read a book I wrote and say, I kind of phoned that one in. He kind of went through the motions. And we all know we've read books like that. We've read books from famous authors, sometimes a series, and you say, yeah, this one kind of felt like he just had a deadline and he just
Yeah, you
got it
meet a
done.
deadline. Yep.
Yeah, and I don't ever want someone to say that about me. I mean, you can like my book or not. I've been lucky to get good reception so far, but whether you like it or not, the worst thing you could say is it doesn't seem like you put your best foot forward or you put your heart into it because I couldn't handle that. I couldn't handle that criticism.
Yeah.
So I have to stick with what keeps my blood pumping.
Yeah, and that is an annoying branding thing that some publishers try to do when they have certain authors, and it's like,
Yeah,
oh, you're this type of author. I remember talking to Tess Gerritsen, where it's like, she had her Rizzoli and Isles books that
yeah,
obviously were huge, and she said because I even talked to her, and the same thing with you. I mean, your first novel was published in 2001. I mean, we're coming up on like the 25th year anniversary of that novel, like a lot of writers do not last 20, over a lot of writers not last more than a decade, quite honestly, for one reason or another, whether it's bad sales or just falling out with the publisher, maybe their editor leaves. I mean, you walk around and use bookstores, you see all these books from authors who had these books from like, Random House or St. Martin's, and then just you never hear from them again. But like, I mean,
yeah.
it's really impressive that, I mean, especially I have to, kudos to you that you've kind of kept it going. I do want to talk about with like, Look Closer. Obviously, it was like your first solo book in a certain amount of time, and it blew up. I mean, it was huge. You look at on Amazon, obviously a crap load of reviews on Amazon, but also shows you like, on Goodreads, I think like over 100,000. I mean, God knows how many copies you sold of that. Like, what do you think about that book? I mean, and sometimes there really is no rhyme or reason. Sometimes some books just hit, sometimes, other books that should hit might not hit. I mean, is there anything that you feel like was kind of the special sauce that really kind of helped propel that book?
I mean, to some extent, I went back to my roots. I went back. I felt like that book reminded me of writing Line of Vision, my first novel, because, like I said, nobody knew I was writing it. I had gotten out of the grind where my publisher was expecting a book a year and tell me what it's about so it fits into your category. And I just wrote what I wanted. And I took my time. It probably took me 2 years to write it, a year and a half to write it. Pretty long time. Um, but I just did what I wanted to do. And I had all these ideas built up. But more than anything, I was just gushing out what I thought was really cool and what I would want to read. And I and changed, like I said before, I changed my mind several times in that book. There's a lot of twists in that book, and many of them I did not come up with until I was on the scene. And I said, oh, wait, I could do this. That would be awesome. But now I got to change everything that came before to accommodate that change. But I didn't care because I didn't have someone breathing down my neck saying, I need this in 6 more weeks. Come on, clock's ticking, you got a deadline. I was just writing what moved me. And I think at the end of the day, probably as much as any book I've written since maybe Line of Vision, that book was just straight fun. Like it really is a fun book. It's got dark subject matter. People are murdered, right? Including on page one. But I think it's a pretty fun book. And those twists can be fun. The characters are fun. I felt like if there's special sauce, it's that. It's that whole Patterson lesson of make every scene enjoyable and don't stop unless it is. If it's not enjoyable, cut it or make it enjoyable, but no slow parts. So that makes the book really hop. And I think people really enjoyed the ride. They didn't just say, oh, that last twist or that middle twist was great, but the ride was fun. Like I couldn't put it down. I read it in two sittings, a pretty long book in two sittings. That tells me you really enjoyed it. So it was sort of throwing it, all of that in there. I wish I could tie it down to one thing I did, but I really think I had fun and the reader had fun.
In terms of the structure, I mean, you're bouncing around in time. Obviously, Halloween night plays a huge factor, and we're kind of,
Yeah.
I mean, well, it happens on first page. I mean, someone gets
Yeah.
killed on Halloween night, and so you have kind of, bouncing back and forth leading up to Halloween, and then you have after
Yeah.
Halloween with kind of from the
Yeah.
detective's point of view. And again, being someone who doesn't really kind of outline going into it, did you know that you were going to be playing around with time like that?
I had an idea that I was going to have a murder on Halloween and have a bit of an investigation after Halloween. And one of the many reasons I chose Halloween, as I say in the book, one of the great things about Halloween is it's the only night of the year where you can dress up in a costume and hide your identity and nobody thinks twice of it. I don't know why there aren't more murders on Halloween. But the other great thing about Halloween is it is a recognizable date. It's always October 31st. And so if I'm going to have a before and after, it's got to the break between before and after has to be a date that you really know. And there's not that many days of the year that you always know what that date is. If I picked a random date, right, Robert, if I just said November 14th, you'd be like, okay, so what? I can't remember that. But you always remember Halloween. And so
Yeah.
when I cut to after Halloween, or if I say before Halloween and the date is October 16th, you know you're 2 weeks from Halloween. You're 2 weeks from the murder that's going to tell you a bunch of stuff. So that was one of the great things because you want to always keep the reader oriented. And that was a way I could always keep them oriented because everyone knew that anchor of October 31st Halloween. So
Yeah.
it worked on so many levels. Yes, I think I at some point early on came to the decision that I needed some investigator to put together the pieces after the fact. And of course, with lots of misdirection and twists.
So do you try to, I mean, do you try to write every day? I mean, what is a typical week? I mean, obviously you said Look Closer took a long time. You're a judge, you have a very serious day job. So it's not
Yeah.
like you can just, spend all day writing. I mean, do you try like how do you like yeah, well, like I mean, and then if you are trying to write in a writing sessions, do you try to do like so many thousand words? Do you try to do at least a chapter? I mean, like do you usually set goals for yourself or just some writers I know will just, like I know like Stuart Onan just wants to do like one page. He is fine like every day, just one page. I mean, what have you found works for you? And has that changed over the years since, since Line of Vision?
So, since I became a judge, which is now 10 years ago, my routine is I try to get up at 3:30 a.m. every morning and write until 7. And
My God,
some
that's usually
mornings
when I'm
I
going to
get this,
bed.
yeah, I don't get enough sleep and it's getting harder to do. But and sometimes yes, I hit the snooze. But people say, how can you get up at 3:30? But it's actually if you can get yourself out of bed, it's a wonderful time to write because nobody wants your attention. Your kids are sleeping, your wife is sleeping, you're not getting emails, you're not getting texts. Um, and the analogy I always give is my children could get 10 hours of sleep at night. But if I had to wake them up to go to school, it would be a challenge to get them out of bed. But I could wake them up in the smack middle of the night if they were getting up to get on a plane to go to Disney World, right?
Mm.
Because that's fun. Like it's a whole different mentality. I'm going to Disney World every morning. Like every time I get up, and when I oversleep, when I sleep past 3:30, I'm mad at myself. And my wife will know it. She'll be like, "Oh, did you oversleep because you're cranky?" But that's my Disney World every day. So that's my fun time from 3:30 to 7. Sometimes it's 6:30, depends on my kids, depends on what I'm doing with my wife. And then during the day, I'm a judge.
So, do you usually though try to have like a certain, like during that writing time, do you try to at least get a certain number I mean, like, a chapter, like a scene. I mean, like, do you try to do like, so many scenes? And then on the flip side, do you edit as you go along, or are you doing kind of like that Nora Roberts vomit draft where you just want to get that first draft out as soon as, as quickly as possible and then kind of go back and then, revise from there?
No, I edit as I go along. Probably to a fault. There are probably times where I could look back at my process of writing a particular book and say, Dave, you should have put a pin in that and just said it needs work and move on. But I usually don't. I'm too stubborn. I'll sit there and keep working on it until it's exactly what I want. Um, there's different ways to do it. If all I did for a living was write books, then I would probably set some kind of parameters so I didn't just write all day long, because I don't think anyone can write all day long. I would probably say, Robert Parker used to say he wanted to write 5 pages a day, and then he'd go walk the beach or whatever. That's pretty cool. If you could write 5 good pages a day, you can get a book done fairly quickly. Um, I have a built-in clock on me. I have a deadline. Whatever time I do get out of bed, at 7, I'm done. So that motivates me, and whatever I can get done. And yes, if I'm not feeling it some mornings, and sometimes that happens, you're not feeling it, I'll go back and edit something I already did, or I'll research something that I need to research. But I don't, I would love to write a chapter a day. I can often do that, but I often don't, and I have to be okay with that.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about like the voice. So something I noticed in Line of Vision, and you do the same thing in Look Closer, is I don't want to say like folksy, but like you use like, like gonna or like sorta as the actual, like not in dialogue, but in the actual exposition narrator voice.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. I just found it very interesting, especially with like Line of Vision, with him, being like was it corporate law? Like, I don't know, like that was just I don't know. I guess that was just an interesting decision. Had when especially going through like the editing process, like when you sold it or through the like did that ever come up? Did you ever get pushback on that?
I mean,
I
the
know it's been a
word I
while. I
use,
mean, you might not remember it all.
no, no, no. I mean, the word I use is conversational. I write in a
Yeah,
very
yeah, yeah. No,
conversational
that's a good
tone,
word for it.
and
Yeah.
and and I think that's how we talk in real life, and that's how we think, to the extent we actually think words. And so I feel like that gives a comfort and an intimacy to the reader. I don't always do that. Dialogue, of course, is a completely different story, but we're not talking about dialogue right now. In the exposition and the narrative of a first person, yeah, I will try to think slash speak, whatever you want to call it, in a conversational mode. I think people find that enjoyable, relatable, relaxing. I try really hard not to get too fancy with words because, of course, that I think takes you out of a scene. If there any moment that the reader thinks the author is trying to impress them is a fail, right? That's a fail. You want to impress them with really good imagery and really good story, not with fancy words.
Yeah.
And so, in a way, Robert, I would almost say it's making sure the words don't get in the way, if that makes sense, because you're trying to create imagery, you're trying to get sight, sound, smell, taste, and you you can screw that up with the word choices. So I try to keep the words casual and conversational as much as I possibly can.
So as you edit as you go along, when you get that initial draft completed, is it pretty solid, or do you still, go back? I mean, how many more drafts or how many more times do you have to go back through until you find like, okay, this is ready to be sent to my agent, publisher, whoever?
Yeah, usually by the time I'm done, I've done enough work on all the other chapters that I'm relatively happy. Unless of course I change something, I will go back through the book, and I'm sure you're a writer. I mean, I'm sure you could go back to anything you've ever written, and you could open up to any page, and you could probably
Oh.
mark it up, right? Like,
Yeah, no, I
so
definitely, yeah, revisiting stuff is awful.
yeah, so I will do one revisit, make sure there's no notes hanging out there that I've done. Occasionally I'll highlight something and, make a point that I got to go back to it. Usually not on the text. Usually that's in a separate outline I'm making as I go along, not an outline of the book beforehand, but as I go along. That's one thing I do is I outline as I go along. So
Mm.
I tell myself, okay, that chapter one was from Simon's point of view, and here's what happened. And if there's a revelation, I'll have a little note, okay, this was a big reveal. So you gave a big reveal in chapter six. So maybe you don't need another one until chapter 14. You don't want to put them too close together or too far apart. You want to keep pacing. Like I'll do all kinds of stuff like that in my separate little document that I'm keeping. Um, but you do go, I will go back through the book feeling like it's done and then tweak. And I might get some inspiration and change something, but more it's tweaking because of that process that I do, unlike some people, which is I don't just vomit it out and move on. I sit there until I'm happy with it, with each chapter. I'm
Do you
not sure
read
that's the
your
best way to do it, by the way, but that's the way I
Well, I
do it.
mean, it's honestly is what works for you. I don't think there's any,
Yeah.
right or wrong way to do it. What do you find? Do you read your stuff out loud
No,
to kind of
no,
like see if there's like a rhythm and flow to when you're doing the scenes?
no. I probably should. People do that. I know people will have somebody else read it. There's things you can buy now. In fact, you can have a celebrity voice. I have an author friend of mine who you and I both know, Alex Finley, and I'm not giving away anything he won't say publicly, but he will read it aloud, but he'll have Gwyneth Paltrow's voice read it aloud because she has given her voice to this word processing, thing you can buy, and he benefits a lot from hearing it read out loud. I don't do that. Maybe I
Yeah.
should, but that has never been my problem.
I think your stuff has a nice flow to it. So I mean, it's certainly working whatever you're doing. I just didn't know if that was something. So we are over the hour. I don't want to keep you much longer, but real quick, because it is the newest book, what can you tell us about the most recent novel, The Best Lies?
I mean, The Best Lies is it's it's a novel about a lawyer who has two very distinctive traits. One is he is a pathological liar, and the second, he has an outsized sense of fairness and justice, by which I mean he will stop at nothing to right a wrong, even if it comes at incredible cost to himself, which it often does. And he's a pathological liar, so it's very hard to know what he's thinking or what he means at any given time. This pathological liar finds himself early on caught in the middle of an undercover FBI investigation where he is forced to try to root out a very bad person. And how he manages to work himself through that with the gifts he has is really what the book is about. But really, he is such a fun character, and I started with him. I always wanted to write a book about a pathological liar because everything I do is deception, and I thought, what better way to do it? And I was very happy with how it turned out.
Yeah, excellent. And that just recently came out in paperback. Obviously, this is the
Yeah,
hardcover. I know paperback has a different cover. They ended up doing, at least on the US edition, they did a different, so it has a different look. But you said that
yeah,
recently came out, so people can find that in bookstores. And then you also, I think you may have mentioned, maybe it was in the green room. You do for international thriller writers. You do kind of like a master class, and I know you did Craft Fest this last year. I guess
yeah.
with Alex Finley. Um, Obviously, people we want people to go to those and, sign up or whatever else. But like, can you talk a little bit about like, just the teaching aspect? Obviously, you've been doing this now for over 20 years. Some writers, I think, still don't like feel comfortable, I guess, teaching. I mean, like, what is those things that what's a good thing that you can like, I guess, good like some good advice you could give some aspiring authors out there?
Yeah, I mean, these classes that I teach at Master Class at Thriller Fest are workshops. And so everybody gives me their 10 pages, and there's 10 of us, or 10
Okay.
of them and one of me, and we workshop it. And so the best way to teach, I think, is not to lay out a bunch of rules because I don't believe in very many rules. I mean, there are certainly pointers I would give people. You gave one at the very beginning, right? Start a scene in the middle of the action. Don't show him getting dressed and eating breakfast and then getting on the L, taking the train to work, and then something happens. Just start with it happening. You can give rules like that out, and those are important. But I think the best way I can teach you, the proverbial student, is give me 10 pages of your writing, And I'll tell you what's good and bad about it, just from my gut, from having done it for so long. And so much stuff, there's no better way to learn. And I don't even necessarily have all the right answers, but I do have a lot of wisdom from doing it for a long time. And then that dialogue, right? Like then you say, these are the things that I didn't like about this. And they say, well, this is what I was trying to do. And I'll say, well, how about this instead? Or maybe you shouldn't be trying to do that, and think about the reader. Does the reader care about that? Or is that just you being very proud of your research? I mean, you may have this great research about something, but nobody else cares. Take it out. It hurts. It's killing your babies, right? That's what we call it, killing your darlings. But take out that research because it's boring to everybody else. And it doesn't matter if you like it, you're not the reader. I mean, always think about the reader. I might say this chapter seems too long. I would punch it up. I would start the action in the middle. So you could sit here and list out like 10 rules, but I think the best way to do it is to show, not tell, by taking something you've written and say, here are the things you could do better, or here is what I was getting from it. Is that what you intended? And the author, the student might say, that's not what I wanted. I wanted you to think this. And I'll say, well, at least as far as I'm concerned, you didn't succeed there. Here's what I would need to see. Here's what I thought of your character. What did you want me to think of your character? And if they don't match, let's talk about why they didn't match. So there's a lot of subjectivity, of course. And I've told you before, I'll say it again, there are no real rules in writing. I mean, every rule can be broken, have a reason, but they can be broken. But there are guiding principles, and it's the other thing I'll say, Robert, is as I learn when I teach. Every time I teach and I talk to people, or I'll say, "Hey, this is a good moment to talk about something with the whole class." I'm reinforcing my own knowledge, and I'm sometimes learning things from what they say to me. So it's really a great experience and a great interactive experience, and I really think there's no better way to teach.
Yeah. No, I think it's great for especially aspiring authors, always finding that groups, people to read your stuff and then not, kind of blow smoke. I mean, if you want to improve as a writer, you need to have people tell, basically be honest with you. I mean, if something's not
Yep.
working, they got to tell you to working, and then you got to get used to accepting that. And I think and then I still run into this personally, whereas like, especially if I'm working on something new, sitting down, like in the back of my head, on some subconscious level, I know a first draft is always going to be awful. And it's always freeing to also accept that. But at the same time, you always want to also make sure, like, you kind of feel like, well, I want to make sure it's this, this first draft is as good as it's going to get or whatever else. And it's like,
Yeah.
I don't know, it's just back and forth. And I know in terms of scenes or whatever else, I know like, especially early out or early on when I was like, in high school and college, like I ran into the trap of always feeling like I had to write everything. Every scene, everything happening. And I think it was like an episode of 24 because everything was in real time
Yeah.
where we got to, I think this like convoy had gotten like attacked. And when they got to that, they didn't see the convoy getting attacked. You just saw the aftermath when they were basically like, like there was like fire everywhere and like there was like people
Yeah.
dead on the ground. And it made
Yeah.
kind of like one of those things like in the back of my head, I'm thinking like, oh, that's right. You don't always have to show every single thing that's happening. We just
Right.
have to be able to you can just easily, and I think it was even somebody had said, with the Game of Thrones, did you watch Game of Thrones or any read those
No.
books?
No, I
So
haven't.
there was a best,
No.
like apparently there was this war or something was going on. And someone who had read the books told me that like that took like, you know, we were in the war or in the battle and it was like, 50 pages, 100 pages of what all this stuff going on. Well, because obviously TV, there's like, time constraints, there's obviously, the budget constraints where they don't have like, enough actors. They were basically focused on somebody behind the trees, like basically seeing them listening to the war. You know what I mean? And it was just
Yeah.
very interesting sometimes where you can kind of like, and again, going down to like, if a chapter is needed, like if you take it out or if you take a scene out or whatever else. But anyway, I don't want to keep any much more of your time. It was great talking to you. Before you
Sure.
go, is there anything that you've read recently, that you've watched, listened to, anything that you would want to recommend to anybody?
Well, so the most recent book I read, I unfortunately already told you about, which is Scott Turow Presumed Guilty. I would not, it's Scott. So I wouldn't say it's a fast-paced thriller. It's not that kind of a book. It is literary, but it is engrossing. It is brilliant. It's like reading To Kill a Mockingbird, 60 years later. in modern times. Um, he continues to be my favorite. I always recommend to people a few authors. I already said Megan Abbott. I think she's great. Um, who's the Irish writer who writes the Irish Murder Squad, the Dublin Murder Squad? Tana French.
Tanya French.
Tana French is amazing. A couple of writers that people may know less. Alex Finley has a pretty good following. He's probably not world famous, but he's actually got a very strong following. But I love Alex Finley. And here's one. I don't know if you met her at Thriller Fest. Her name is Hannah Morrissey.
Hmm.
Hannah writes dark stuff, but she is an absolutely brilliant writer. Her prose is beautiful. Her stories are great. She's an up and comer. She's young. She's a lot younger than me. Um, she's a star. So Hannah Morrissey, Alex Finley, two people I really, really admire, who I only came upon in the last few years, but I'm really glad I did.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned, I mean, you made it almost sound like a bad thing. We're like, well, Scott does kind of literary. I think it's good. If you want to be a thriller writer, obviously you want to write or read good thrillers, but I think it's also good always to read outside, your preferred genre.
Oh yeah.
Like a to read literary to read. I mean, sometimes I'll even read some like Nora Roberts books. You know, what I mean, like I think it's good to like try to like expand, just to kind of
Oh
see
yeah,
what's
no
out there. Like
question.
in the last couple of years, I've tried reading a lot more translated works like some like like Japanese crime novels. There was The Thief by I'm not even gonna try to pronounce the name, but you know what I mean. Like there are like
Yeah.
so many great novels that are not even published initially in English. That so it's yeah definitely a good thing. No matter what if you want to be a crime writer, thriller writer, horror writer, romance writer, whatever else, definitely yeah reading outside the genre I think is always definitely
No, that's
recommended.
that's absolute. Just read good writing. Read good
Yeah,
writing, and mostly your genre. But you're right. Stretch your muscles and read other things and be inspired by every. I mean, I'm inspired by any great writing I read. I'm inspired by great music. I'm inspired to write by great music. I'm inspired to write by great
do you
movies.
listen to music when you write?
It depends, but what I will tr yeah, often I do, and I will usually try to set the mood. I've got some playlists, for example, that are all instrumental and they're either like spooky or creepy or scary music. And it's easy to find these days, such playlists, and I pick and choose the songs that I really like, and I'm very picky about it. Sometimes I listen to pop music. I mean, I've listened to Taylor Swift. She's got a
Yeah.
couple of slow songs that I really, really like. And one of them in particular, I know I should not be admitting this, but my kids laugh at me, but there's a song by Taylor Swift called LOML. I think it's called Love of My Life. I think that's what that stands for. One of these modern day, initialing. And I really liked it. And it was on a playlist, and I was always sad when it was over. So I found a playlist that put that song on repeat. And when I was finishing the most recent book that I just finished, and I really needed to focus, that song kept me in just the right mood. A little bit creepy, a little bit sad, a little bit haunted. That was the mood I was needing. And so I listened to that song over and over again for like 6 hours. And actually, probably more like 15 hours over like a 3-day period at the end when I was getting it done. And my wife thought I lost my mind, but you want to keep it in the background, but if it's inspiring you, if it's something that inspires you, then it's working. If it's distracting you, turn it off.
Yeah,
That's my rule.
absolutely. So again, the most recent book is The Best Lies. Your new book, I mean, we don't obviously have to go into it right now, but do we have a potential pub date or do we have an idea like when it might come out?
June 30th of next year.
June 3rd. All right. Something to look forward
Yeah.
to.
Yep.
So David, thank you again for making time. It was a pleasure. And
Yeah.
everyone go check out all of David's books. And yeah, we'll see everybody next time. Bye.
Well, thanks